When the credits start rolling, but the movie keeps haunting you.
Before, after.
Then it's time to tune in to Dismembering Horror. We'll talk about what worked and also what didn't. We'll dissect every aspect. Maybe some we shouldn't.
He turned out to be a completely unreliable asshole.
Take it away, boys.
Hello, Tim.
Hello, Ryan.
And hello, everyone listening. Welcome to episode 178 of Dismembering Horror, where today we're going to talk about the 2022 film Fresh. It's a fresh film.
Yum, 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 yum.
Is that what you were thinking when watching this, Tim?
Mm-hmm. Boy, oh boy, was I.
Cool. All right. Well, I don't think I have any, what is it called? Housekeeping, past business to anything to address here. Do you have anything, Tim?
I mean, I think your shirt is pretty sweet.
All the more reason we just gotta get in on the video podcasting game here, Tim.
That's right.
So we're really putting on our face.
I got my vibe room rocking right now. I could turn on some twirling, colorful lights.
Yeah, Tim's vibe room, I can explain it for you. I'm looking at, he has a starlight. It's got a purple blue haze, my favorite color combination. It's all looking good. All right, then. Well, then I think we can just jump into it. And we like to do just that with a trailer to set the mood. All right, are you ready, Tim?
I'm always ready.
Great. All right, as I said, from 2022, directed by Mimi Cave, written by Lauryn Kahn, starring Daisy Edgar Jones and Sebastian Stan the Man, Fresh.
The women in our parents' generation, they were more into femininity. You know what I mean? Because I think you would just look great in a dress.
You
but I
guys
mean,
okay?
if you were...
Pretty much done, actually, thank you.
If it's cool, I'm just going to snag these leftovers.
I don't know how you do it, Molly. Do what? Dating people. No, you do not need a man, okay?
So don't play the games. Just be you, straight out the gate.
Do you live around here? Because I live on aisle 6. That was terrible.
It was kind of terrible.
What's his Instagram? I want to stalk a little bit.
He doesn't have one.
Say what?
Yeah.
Oh no, see, that's shady.
Let's play a game. Tell me something you don't want me to know.
I hate this.
Okay.
Put all our hopes in finding happiness through someone else.
Yeah.
Girl, you are all digmatized and I haven't even seen this dude.
What's going on?
I'm going to tell you, but you're going to freak out.
No, this isn't happening.
Yeah, it's happening. No games. Know what you wanted? It's about giving.
And with that, we like to transition into our ratings per our rating system. So very much in the spirit of the show, meaning this is just our own subjective opinions. What would you tell yourself, Tim, as far as in regards to this film? Would you tell yourself to avoid, stream, rent, or buy Fresh? Had you not ever seen it before?
I really like this movie, like a lot. So I would buy it.
I hope Hulu gets into the physical media game for you.
Yeah. It's gotta exist at some point, right?
Yeah. Actually, I don't know. I don't know what Hulu's track record is with their sort of produced films.
Well, it's Fox Searchlight, right?
Right.
Which is now owned by Disney. So I presume they obviously have the capability. So maybe it'll come through that kind of realm, like Fox Searchlight will put out a DVD.
Yeah.
Or Blu-ray or whatever.
Cool. Can you give us sort of in brief summary why you'd tell yourself that?
I think, overall it's operating on some core elements that I just really almost always seem to enjoy, which is kind of this, it's not specifically a two-hander, but it's essentially a two-hander, right? It's like two people getting into it in an isolated scenario, and it's I don't know if you would call it cat and mouse so much, like what was the one we just watched? I Saw the Devil. But it kind of has that vibe, right? It's just two people having to go at it. And there's something really pleasing to me about the simplicity of stories like that. And it doesn't have to just be two people, but, isolated location, somebody needs to solve a problem. It seems pretty dire. Like, those are just really basic things that I love. And it's a escape the monster kind of thing. So I love that stuff.
Great. Cool. Should I tell you what I thought of it?
I would love to hear it.
Okay. It's funny. I'm kind of, I don't know, our rating system's an interesting one because I think, like, kind of for what I'm used to, I definitely was really into it, like where I want to put it up there with Rent-Its for sure. Yet at the same time, when watching it, I'm like, this should be where Stream-Its are at, like this is a great, like, this is when we see advertising on bus posters for a new Hulu film, it should have this standard of quality. And I was pleasantly surprised, just sort of with my own weird expectations I always have going in with, like, cannibal horror movies, where it's the kind of thing that's made me resist watching the what's like the Drew Barrymore cannibal Netflix show.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
So it's just something about that marketing. It's just, I only just hear in my head this voice going, but it's people, but they're eating people. And I just, I don't know. I'm like, I get it. But no, this does so much with it. That was just, I can't deny how satisfying it was. And I was really into it. So yes, how about just, I don't know, even though I feel like there's a part of me that's like, this is what streaming should mean and be, just in reference to some recent reviews, I'll put it as a Rent-It because
fair enough.
It's that good. Yeah. All right. Well, then to further get into our dissection and dismemberment here, Tim, since you thought so highly of it, we would especially love it if you could give us a summary, help us get us all on the same page here.
Okay. Well, so we have our main character, Noah, who is in the throes of modern day dating and the pitfalls of that. And we see all of this through her perspective of how, and like, I can relate to this, but from a woman's perspective, how just god awful dating and online dating in particular has become, or it always was. And, her desperation to actually find like a genuine connection kind of leads her inadvertently, or I guess leads her to become a prime target for Sebastian Stan, who's playing Steve. And Steve picks her up, and it seems all kind of whirlwindy, and not without its red flags, but she chooses to ignore them. And that was a mistake. Because turns out Steve's not really Steve. He's Brandon, and Brandon is a psychotic, I guess killer, ultimately. He is a person who captures women and harvests meat from them, but the fresher the meat, the better, because he makes a lot of money off of it.
Tim, I gotta feel like we just gotta stop there to mention, if you're with us our last episode, you just described exactly what that film was. I Saw the Devil. Like, what a double screening by chance we've had here. Anyways.
I love it. Yeah, so the key element to his methodology is that if he keeps you alive longer, the meat is fresher and earns a higher price for him. So holding somebody or multiple women captive while he keeps them alive at the same time as removing tasty morsels from their body. So you could lose a leg, stay alive. I mean, I imagine that the end game is sort of you harvest everything you can whilst keeping somebody alive. You'd end up with like a blind, tongueless head and torso, and that's about it. Like, I think you could probably keep somebody alive at that point still, theoretically. And they, you know, and then what else is there to harvest? He does that. So she has to figure out how to navigate that.
Navigate that.
And it's exciting and dark, and but she figures it out. It's a romp, man. We should have done this with the rom crime women.
Yeah, shout out to another member of our podcast Connected Network family. Yeah, you're right. It would have been fun to hear.
Because there are some clear nods to serial killers, like specific serial killers throughout. In particular, Ted Bundy and the sort of the look of Sebastian Stan.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it there you go. That's it. It's a romp. Her friend Molly, is the sort of, she's on to this as a problematic relationship because of all the little red flags, and she ends up coming and helping out. So it's a great time.
Great time over at Tim's house, just like
yeah,
everything you love.
My girlfriend Britt was like, man, I put a lot of trust in you, didn't I? Meaning that, like, we met online.
Yes.
And, like, she lived in Milwaukee. And she, after we had been talking for a while, was like, would you consider coming to Milwaukee? Like, she met me by herself. You definitely, maybe not the most advisable way to go about things. I think we had established a good enough rapport, but you never know. You never know. Steve could become a Brandon real fast.
But at least you had social medias to stalk.
That's true. Fewer red flags, I'm sure.
All right. So I'd love to hear more about what you loved about it, Tim. Are you ready for that in our next big section?
Oh, man, I'm so ready.
Here we go. What worked?
What worked? What worked for you? What worked for you? What worked for you?
It worked like a charm, Smith.
What worked? What worked for you?
Right off the bat, you've got the lens, literally, through the lens of multiple women. And what I mean by that is not just from a story point of view, but from a filmmaking point of view. Our director and writer are women, and they're setting quite the scene. And I just, right away, the opening scene is so incredibly spot on of the experience of women currently that I like, the broader, collective experience of dating of women that I've spoken with. Part of why I even say that is because I spent a bit of time asking women how that experience was for my own film that I've just finished sort of filming. And because all these very similar themes. And like everybody says, well, almost everybody says essentially the same thing. And this opening scene just captures all of that so goddamn perfectly. It's amazing. His character's name is Chad on an online date, this Chad. And like everything he says is just such the gross, like borderline incel, misogynistic, just like objectification of women. He tells her that she'd look a lot better if she wore clothes that were like form-fitting instead of baggy sweaters, and that it's like part of the I don't remember how he puts it, but the breaking down of femininity in our world and how that's the root of problems. It's like, shut up. He's the worst. And then he like he does the splitting the check thing, which he had reminded her of, like to bring money so that they could split the check, which I have my own opinions on check splitting and whatever, but like there's a tactful way to approach that, and he does not do it in that way. What else? He's dressed like just a dork, like a tool. Who cares really what people wear, but it speaks to the character that he's got this sort of like big flowy scarf thing going on, and he's just careless and clunky, and you know, in other circumstances that could be endearing, but he's such a gross dude all around. And of course the the date ends with her saying, you know, nice to meet you, but I don't think it's a match. And he does a thing that is, it's just so remarkably common and frankly hard to wrap my head around, that this is the way human beings respond. But it is, if not the norm, extraordinarily common, that when men get a rejection, they immediately flip to this attitude of, well, you're not that great anyway, fuck you, you're a bitch, you're stuck up, all of these things. It's like, what are we doing, guys? Like, really, get your shit together and stop being so goddamn fragile. Anyway, so that was an editorializing of my opinion on that. Anyway, my point is that the scene is just perfectly encapsulating this thing, this experience that, and not just women, but like, you know, a lot of people are experiencing, in particular, marginalized or disenfranchised or people who identify in a less patriarchal, misogynistic realm. They identify on the other side of those things. They tend to be the target of those things. Anyway.
Yeah. No,
my whole point is it's a great setup.
Yeah, I agree. It's just so nice and refreshing to just immediately be in the hands of the women gaze for once, or whatever you want to call it. And just that perspective where I'm like, not just empathizing with her in a story sense, but on some like deeper experiential sense that I think can only happen when it's written, directed by women. I can't help but, Tim, also have my very like male perspective on the situation, which is just fun and is what I can offer here by default. So not only was it just so great to like feel that frustration that you're talking about, like you've heard these real life stories that this is what it's like for women dating, but man, I was just like so frustrated watching it, being like, you got a date with this woman, dude, and like this is what you're doing. It like was giving me hope, you know, but then making me mad. Like, if I could just get a match with her, you know, like that's where I'm at.
Well, it's one of those things, right? Because like, obviously there are men in the world who don't suck, but it becomes very hard to navigate when the norm is this kind of nonsense. And so like, I mean, this movie is a perfect example of this, right? Like, what? Imagine all of the pitfalls of dating from a woman's perspective. That even when you meet somebody who actually seems to be legit and chill and like kind and interested and all of the things that you're actually looking for, even that person can be deceitful. right? So for the whatever fraction of the male population that actually is just pleasant and nice and caring, they are subject to that same scrutiny because they have to be, because women can't, like, there's too many douchebags out there for women to take everything at face value or anything at face value.
Yeah. Well, talking about taking things at face value and to kind of like push us along chronologically here, but stay on those themes and ideas. Next, we get where she meets Mr. Charming, our our Sebastian Stan as Steve / what was his fake name or real name? Brandon. Where I thought, again, just
by the way,
done.
The name choices are friggin' perfect.
But again, just so well done of feeling like where I'm in the hands where by default you just aren't in one of those situations where you're mad at her for like going along with him too much. You don't like lose her like she's being like an idiot or something who, you're like, or don't you're in a horror movie or whatever. Like just how it was written, performed, everything across the board. It was just like a realistic, sympathetic portrayal of someone is like fine on her own, but like, kind of is already maybe embracing the aspect her friend says of like, oh, you don't need a man. But like at the same time, like she wants to date. She wants all that comes with that.
We want connection. That's a normal thing to want.
So we get where she's coming from. We're kind of charmed by this guy as well. We talk up on her. I don't think this is said in the film, but I'm just projecting, but it's like we talk about so much just the ills of social media, and so many of us are like threatening to get off of it these days and and yada yada. So, it's maybe kind of a red flag, kind of not in a way. Could be a green flag, he's off of it. But just all that was done in such a way where, I felt like seduced and caught up with her versus any kind of like frustration that she was going along with him.
Let's just say that if from a writing lesson, this is like the best example of creating a sympathetic character in the opening scene, so that when she steps into more treacherous territory, we're on board with her immediately. Like having the scene with Chad makes us immediately like her and sympathize with her her like headspace, so that when she is faced with these red flags, we completely understand why she would ignore them. It's so well constructed. It helps the audience along in the most like perfect way without hitting you over the head with it.
So, we won't put a pin on it. I want to keep coming back to these themes on modern online dating that are throughout the whole film. But we also have now this other whole aspect of eating people, right? Clear,
it's so good.
Clear ways the themes can kind of connect are the sort of the gender norms of, men in control, whatever. But I'm kind of curious to hear from you, like how did we transition to, how did it kind of incorporate both of those themes for you to kind of like incorporate the whole eating people side of it now?
Well, I think that the way that the filmmakers lead us in is to constantly showcase food and eating and mouths, and like even the song selections are all having to do with food or eating or hunger, or sort of the metaphor of hunger. And so we're kind of being coached into it in a way. Like we're led toward this just generalized undertone of what is food and why, and like, why do we consume, not why exactly, but that we are consumers of food. And so it's just a good way to kind of keep us on track of that's where we're heading. So like every character I think we meet, before we get the reveal of what's actually, where we're actually going, we see everybody's mouth in like close up in some form or another, and almost all of them eating something at least once. And so it's just sort of, I think it's just a smart way to keep us on track of like, this is where we're going. This is the theme. This is, important to kind of capture visually, so that when we do get to the actual, the reality of that this is cannibalism, we're all kind of primed for that. So what was your question? That was all to say something.
I mean, I was just wondering how, if we, started off talking about whatever themes that modern dating brings up and sort of the setup brings up, like how does that more or less tie to the cannibalism theme?
Well, and I think it's in the title, right? It's fresh, right? We think when we so often in our culture, we objectify women as, we turn them into objects. And we've had this conversation a few times. It's correlative to the same ideas of how we dissociate the being aspect, the actual like sentient being aspect of animals that we eat. And we kind of do the same thing with women in a sexualized objectification way, right? Like we're almost removing this is a person. This is like a living, breathing human being that has thoughts and like a life, and reducing them down to an object to be consumed. And you can apply that sexually consumed, visually consumed, and in this case, we're just taking it one step further, actually consumed. And that the idea of that object now is the pinnacle of consumption from a taste and like, food point of view, is furthering that objectification theme.
Right. So,
and I think that's brilliant to me.
So it's that objectification, it sounds like you're getting at, that happens naturally with online dating. And it's kind of like a two-way street. It feels like where you're reducing yourself, making your own profile to like, something that's, all the words you were just using, that isn't a full scope of yourself, that allows you to be objectified. And then just that own feel that happens then on the other end when you're just swiping through people going off of first looks or whatever. Yeah,
you're packaging. Everybody's packaging themselves in this realm. That's why I've always felt, ironically, I am with somebody who I met online, but like I always disliked the construct of online dating for this reason, because you're really not, you're jumping over a bunch of really important components of getting to know somebody, or even like the first moments of attraction a lot of the time should or have been in the past based on how we exist in space and our perception of that with another person. Like it's very different. It's why we, during the pandemic, I think a lot of people had a really hard time with online Zoom or FaceTime style interaction, because we're losing some really important elements. You don't get to feel the person in the room. Like that actually does have an effect on us, probably on a molecular basis. And you also don't get to experience them in sort of a behavioral way in the same way. And that's really important just as humans. Like we respond to that primally.
Yeah, I think there's an authenticity there, that if we can capture that or bottle that, that's like, where the money's at, so to speak. That's what everyone's seeking these days, what everyone's seeking in a way. And where I'm kind of pushing it in that direction, I wanted to bring up just a few ways that I was breaking down the theme here, you know, that the movie was presenting. And well, first I'll just say I love this kind of story. Like, I'll defend the Hostel movies to death because of just this great story. Rich people who have just gone down the hole of searching for bigger and bigger extremes, who are now at the level of exploiting other people through violence and bodily dismemberment and eating them in this case. Same exact deal with I Saw the Devil. That's what it was about. So good. But what I was kind of just saying as far as, and what you kind of been talking about in the dating terms too, the objectification, yet still craving some kind of connection and authenticity. I loved the touch in this movie of just all the details of how their meat is being packaged, and just all the context surrounding that. The fact that it is just women, they go for way more money, tends to be younger women, and then it comes with like a picture of them, a lock of their hair. It's like the support a child thing, like, or whatever, like
God, yeah.
Sponsoring an animal or whatever, something like that. I loved it too, like when he explains, when she's asking all about it, that if they're still alive, the meat goes for way more, not just in a preservation taste sense, but in a like, as if they're forming some kind of intimate connection with this still living person by eating their leg.
Which he clearly does, right? Because his own wife is a former victim.
Yeah, right? Oh, that was a great touch. Yeah. Yeah, that's all that. I feel like that was something I always wanted from this kind of movie. Like, it was great, and I Saw the Devil. It's sort of a different version of it, where it's just about like reducing the women meat to pure, just like shoving your face full, of just this like raw, uncooked, red goop almost. But here, just to see it through the lens of, it's a fine dining. It's about pleasure. Yeah, it's a delicacy. So all that was great. And then what I wanted to say too, just on the theme, this may be, I mean, you tell me, maybe this is a more tenuous connection I'm trying to make here, but I am really trying to like draw the connections between where they exist between the dating world, the online dating world, and cannibalism. And kind of like what you were just saying, the disconnect from maybe what we're eating when we're eating it, if it's animal product or whatever. Yeah, like kind of that leap of faith maybe one has to make when, it's all about when giving over your trust to someone when you don't know them. You're almost ignoring maybe or maybe not existing other side to them, which is very much, she's, there's this whole hidden side to him. And I don't know, just that disconnect between like our vision that always exists at any given time in who we're dating, which isn't the real them. Maybe again, this is where the tenuous connection is, but I saw one between like, that's what it is when, we're eating spaghettis with meatballs on top of it, between like the whole process of what those meatballs are or where they came from. Yeah, I don't know. Is that there at all for you? Is that tenuous?
Yeah, I think you can extrapolate that.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Well,
I think really what you're saying is we compartmentalize our realities. Right? Like, we put certain things into view and we decide to be okay with them. But in doing so, a lot of the time, that means we have to put some other related things out of view. And that's just how our brains work, right? Like, we're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
If we like let all of the information around us, all the stimulus around us in, we would see and hear nothing. It would just be chaos. So like, It's kind of just part of the system. But we're doing it in an intellectual way.
Right. But when that chaos of, not being, or maybe is sort of our own control mechanism, not being too overwhelmed at the reality of reality at any given time, there are some things in this that I loved from the perspective of someone who doesn't eat meat that were just so satisfying. Of yeah, like I said, the meatballs on spaghetti, like that scene where he serves it to her, and you get like what would normally be in like a restaurant for an ad for an Italian restaurant, these beauty shots of the sensuous tender meat with the Parmesan shreds in close up melting on it.
Yep.
I mean, it looks no different from cow meat or animal meat, whatever it may be. But in this context, of course, that context is there. It's human meat, and it just offers that completely different lens that, like, for me, it's satisfying. Like, I don't know. I have difficulty with, like, you know, there's all the extreme footage that exists and one can look at of how meat is made, right? And I like totally get and sympathize with some of like where protesters, whatever you call them, you know, out there with meat is murder posters showing the footage. There is a catharsis for me because it's like, but this is the truth. Like, you know, you should just like know this. That's all anybody wants, right? But at the same time, that should be on one's own, you know, like boundary level or whatever to know that. But I can't deny there is this frustration when it's just like, yeah, that's fine, like eat what you want, but just like know the real, like this is the situation, like just be aware and know that this is what it looks like. Don't be in denial. That's all, you know. You just want your fellow people around and friends. It's not to be in some kind of active denial. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, aside from just for a movie to so well do that, basically, by like allowing us to show something that by showing something that normally or in a lot of contexts is shown as wonderful, decadent, delicious, just having the touch of it not being an animal for once.
I think that's why I like this movie so much, is because it really is taking it's forcing us, which is what I think one of the main reasons I love horror is that it's a genre in which you are often forced to look at things that we as a society have been told to not look at, to like put blinders on around. And this is saying, hey, like grabbing your chin and like, you know, pulling you back around to say, actually, no, you need to look at this. Like, seriously, look at it for real. Because like, if you can make the leap that to ignore where the meatball came from, why can't you make that same leap if it's coming from a plant-based source? Still just a meatball. Make the same leap in the other direction.
Or a human-based source, which is what these people are doing. Yeah.
Exactly my point, right? So, come on, guys. Anyway, I mean, I say this and I still eat meat, so it's like I'm having that, I grapple with that all the time. But I'm not aware of it anymore. I'm not, ignoring it anymore. And I think that's at least a step. It's a step. I don't know which step it is, but I'm in there.
Yeah.
So one thing you said that really, seemed meaningful to me too is in this reference to sort of the theme, like the Hostel style theme of the ultra rich exploiting these or fetishizing these things for the sake of decadence or the sake of seeking out something that is taboo or considered unattainable or whatever. And as you described it, I immediately was just like, yeah, they do that anyway, right? Like that's the world. So this is just furthering the reality of how very wealthy people in our world essentially are just exploiting everybody all the time, right? Anybody who's not them.
Right. It's I think one reason I love these kinds of stories so much is that I just absolutely 100% buy them. Like
sure.
It doesn't seem at all out of the realm. I mean, stuff does, like, maybe not with the sort of the dressing ups that, you know, the hustle movies and this movie has, but I'd be more surprised if there weren't people out there paying for human meat, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think that as two non-rich people, you and I, it's easy for us to imagine this other world that is out there or could be out there.
I gotta reference Society,
Right.
another film
Yeah.
I really loved. We covered, yeah.
And maybe that's not reality. We don't know. But what is titillating about it is the idea that people who, as a rule, exploit the masses are at least metaphorically doing some really like crazy, gnarly stuff. Like we can relate to that concept because we are on the receiving end of the exploitation. It's Schadenfreude, right, in a way.
Well, I think we can relate to it on to I guess this is on sympathizing with the rich people in a way. So that's offensive, excuse me. But I think on a human level, this movie did a really good job where like you felt where dude, Sebastian Stan, Steve, Brandon was coming from when he describes, it's not to sound like I would actually do it. I would never do this, of course, but it just seemed like it was akin to like trying heroin or something, you know, where he talks about there's that first time you do it. And then, you know, from that moment on, there's just nothing else like it. So just on a very human level, this idea of like an insatiable urge, which can only be satiated by this one thing. That for me is a very human thing on just like, because then you just apply that across the board to wherever it is in your own life of that high that you reached, that you're always chasing, whatever your addiction may be, yada, yada.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can say, sure, like just call it your demons or whatever. But what my takeaway of that, or what is interesting to me about that, is that metaphorically speaking, it's an excuse in a way. It's like we see this excuse all the time of like, oh, I couldn't resist, I couldn't, you know, like her skirt was just so short and she was enticing me so much, I just couldn't hold myself back. Like, shut up. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, this excuse has been out there forever. And you know, we could argue the measurement of compulsion, I guess, and say, oh, sure, there's a tipping point where compulsion actually is overtaking reason. I guess you could make that argument. But by and large, it's used, that language is used in misogynistic realms as an excuse.
Yeah.
And I think that in this film, it's my takeaway was that's the vibe or the theme that I was responding to in those moments, where it's like you're just saying, "Oh yeah, well I couldn't," you know, once you whatever, go lady meet, you know, everything changes.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting too. I mean, maybe this is just hopefully not retreating ground, but how there's a differentiation between the meat preparer and like the guy who's doing the act of capturing the women and, you know, torturing them in essence, even though he would never look at it that way. And then the rich men, the dudes who are then paying for it, or even that differentiation between when Steve prepares it as a full meal. Like, you think about it as, it's just that process between where it originates and what the end result is. Is it a tasty looking meatball with Parmesan with like just the right amount of garnish, or is it, is it the act of capturing a woman and, chopping off her leg? It's just literally putting it out on a plate for someone to not even have to worry about all that.
Yeah.
It turns it into just the presentation. Just like why, I don't know, for me, it came down to, in kind of transitioning into not eating meat, like it was I just got so in touch with the side of me that just like, because I don't live on a desert island, but I just, in today's day and age, would I kill an animal myself? Like, could I bring myself to even like slit the throat of a chicken, to gut a fish even? Like, no, I wouldn't. I don't picture myself doing that. I don't have that urge. I would feel bad doing it, me in person. So that to me doesn't make it like, oh, if I all of a sudden have a go-between, it doesn't make me actually feel better about it. There was a cognitive dissonance for me. So I don't know if I'm going in circles here or I just went off on a different thread, but that.
Well, what it brings up to me is the portrayal of this dude and the revelry that he takes in the preparation. So, we, and I, relating it back to dating too, you hear this often, and that one of the more attractive qualities in a person, especially in a romantic partner, is passion and revelry and how good they are at something, how much time and effort they put into a skill or into whatever pursuit they have. And so it really is creating this pretty like hard to grapple with dichotomy, especially with casting Sebastian Stan, who is widely sort of endeared to by people. Like people just seem to really like him, and he's charming, he's great, like he has all these qualities. And to couple that with the horror of what he's actually doing and what he's actually passionate about is such a fun, interesting thing to have to like come to terms with, right? Like we're horrified by it, but we see him dancing around and like he's Tom Cruise in Risky Businessing, you know what I mean? And we're like, oh, well, we love that. We love that movie. We love the revelry in that. So it's just great that like forcing us to have to look at those two things in conjunction with each other is awesome.
Right. Kind of how their relationship, if you call it that, their courting all plays out really had me thinking about the idea of constructs and how even if something is just baseline broken or wrong about like one of these constructs in society that we all agree to kind of operate under, it doesn't make how do I put this? It doesn't make things within it like all okay. Just if that thing is broken, like okay, maybe I can explain like as if, we get the idea that he does and by genuinely like her, right? That, there maybe was some kind of real chemistry for them. But what the hell does that matter when the construct he's in is that he's still literally capturing her to kill her
Right.
off and sell her into meat? Yeah, and then same then that idea of constructs and existing under them can also be applied to just meat eating and our relationships with food and all that. But yeah,
I think it's it's a depiction of a thing that this is why I've said this before. I'm fascinated by true crime stuff and serial killers in particular, is because they are human beings and they exist. There's a reason that they do or are doing or have done what they have. The horrible, horrible things. There's a reason for it. It's not just this, oh, they're evil and evil is going to do evil, and it's binary. There's good and evil. There's causation, right? Like their brains developed in a certain way, genetically, environmentally, combination of all those things, trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma, whatever, like led them. And no, not that was an accidental, but led itself, like the element lead. There's a correlation of high levels of lead in high concentration areas of serial killers in the 70s, right? Like, so there's all these things that led this person, the serial killer, to potentially behave the way they did. And we can extrapolate those things and potentially say, oh, this is why. Now, doing that does not apologize for anything. But we can actually, that's my point, is why I'm fascinated by it. And a movie like this is really doing that as well. It's pulling the sort of onion apart and being like, here's who this guy is, here's why he does what he does, here's how he operates, and putting that in the context of the dating world and having, our heroine have to sort of be faced with all of that and navigate it and try to survive it is a complex and incredibly interesting world to live in for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And I love all of those components and the way that the filmmakers depict all those things thematically, symbolically, visually, and like ironically a lot of the time is just so incredibly well done. We haven't even talked about the filming of the movie.
No. Well, real quick, and then maybe we can move on for this more thematic, abstract stuff. But everything you just said there gave me a little bit more to chew on as far as what I meant with the idea of
you did it again.
Of constructs, right? Because how you're explaining it there, the way you set it up, I don't know if you necessarily meant it this way, but it's about, it kind of paints a vision as, people are constantly like choosing to do the wrong thing almost, or because something happened to them and then they're choosing to do. But I see it more, it's like, again, it's this broken construct, and then it's a matter of, do you become aware of that or not? And then it's a more matter of like, can you break that? Because like you can get like even those people who maybe tried that first bite of meat. I mean, she eats it, it's in the context of escaping, but I don't know, on some level, I feel like you can, I don't think I would do it. No, I wouldn't do it. But like, to trying meat in some kind of context like that, on most movies and stories, we can continue to sympathize with a person if we're with them when they did the wrong deed for the first time. And then it's about them trying to escape that and never do it again. Right. So I see that applied to like the horrible dude she has the date with at the beginning. It's like, as if he's representative of this like construct, as if the way he's acting, where you call a woman a bitch or whatever, like that when she's walking away, as if that's the norm or the given somehow, in his world, which I guess is this being depicted as is still largely the world.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a reason we've been talking about this thematic abstract stuff for an hour. You know what I mean? It's because the movie is it just so packed full of it. But
and how does the filmmaking in a practical sense support everything we've just been talking about?
Okay. So here's some things that worked for me from a filmmaking point of view, visual point of view. There's an incredible use of lens differentiation to get us in the sort of experiential realm with the characters. So for example, probably the most stark example is when Noah has actually gotten to his house out in the woods and he gives her a drink, they increasingly on the takes of her widen the lens and distort her face and put the camera closer and closer to her face as she starts to come under the effects of the drug and under the effects of the realization that something is wrong, like she's in trouble. And they do the opposite with him. His lens starts to become more of a long lens. He gets further and further kind of away. And they actually use, I think they're using what's it called? A tilt shift effect on him too. So it creates this like weird halo around him. And they pull out of focus a lot of things in this movie at like very specific points, which I think has this almost dreamlike effect at various times. It's like, it's just really, really specific and like, well, it's using those tools in a really like broad way. A lot of films, I feel like, pick 2 or 3 kind of visual rules for their look of the film, and they stick within that. This one feels like it's using like 50 different things throughout. And, that can backfire, I suppose, but I think it's just in such good hands with these filmmakers that it doesn't. And it really actually like enhances the point of whatever image they're trying to show us. And I don't know, I found it refreshing. You see what I did there?
Yeah, didn't I just say that?
I know. Yeah, but I'm just doing it again because, why not? I found it so refreshing because I feel like we're in the hands of filmmakers that are not falling prey to this idea of like the rules are the rules and you have to film things this way because that's how it's been done.
Yeah, it's not the rules are the rules, it's the tools are the tools.
Yeah, and I really just enjoy that. I think the set design and the production design and the costume design in this film are amazing. Visually amazing. Like the house that they end up in is so both eerie, cold, and nostalgically warm at the same time for me.
It reminded me of the rich Canadian equivalent of the Human Centipede house.
Oh, I never saw that, and I kind of don't want to. But okay, cool. So there's just such specific choices being made that like enhance everything about the movie. Like the color palette is so cool, and like it reminded me too of like a movie I watched recently, which I don't remember if you've seen, but Censor is just their use of like I don't know, right now it feels like there's a movement toward, or maybe I'm just exposing myself to more of these movies, but this use of color theory and really honing in on those things is becoming more and more exciting to me, I guess. It's not like other films aren't doing it, but this particular realm of horror, I guess, is doing it right now. And I just find it really exciting. And there's this modality, right? Like there's this sort of almost 70s, 80s kind of vibe that's going on, but in a modern filmmaking construct. And I love it.
This film really reminded me of, or a film that we've watched that I think would be a good touchstone for this film and would make a great double screening with it, was Piercing. You remember that one?
Yes. I kept thinking of that, actually.
Right? Yeah, stylized sense, themes, all that. So, yes, I can continue one of the thoughts you're making on the style, just to sort of feed it into now, like moments that I thought were handled particularly well or got my attention, got me to sit up in my seat. There was the which is now like a trope in horror movies, but it's one of those where I say that with zero negative connotation because it's just so like, it's always going to be great. It always works. It's always so realistic and always makes sense for the context, which is the drugging or knocking out of who then becomes the victim by someone else. It doesn't matter how many times you've seen it. Yeah, it happens enough that it is a trope, but it's just, it is what you would do in so many situations, like chloroform, knocking someone over the head, drugs like that, they exist. So there's no reason it wouldn't be used. But then it's always fun to see how they maybe handle it a little differently or whatever, the context of it, that it is something that's done all the time. I loved the pacing of this one, where it did start out with, like you pointed out, this kind of interesting, I forget what the effect's called, that semi out of focus kind of light refracting effect that does capture a kind of real drugged feel in a way. But it just happened where it felt perfectly stretched out, where like we were really with her as the effects of the drug were settling in and just coming to the realization that something was wrong, which then just made it so when we get our opening title 30 minutes in and the music hits, it's just like a great here we go moment, where not only have we been milked from this great first 30 minutes of like the seduction of the romance or, being on board with a movie, even if it didn't even go south like this. They say that's the hallmark of a good film, is if you're into it before the movie element happens to it, whatever the fantastical element is. But then, to then have this great poisoning or whatever you call it, drug scene, just like so perfectly timed, and hadn't seen one quite like that before.
The amount of time that the camera holds on Steve once she has hit the floor and is clearly out, where he just casually sits there, not moving, just sort of there. And then, like, I don't know how long it is. It's probably 10 seconds or something like that. But like a film 10 seconds of just nobody moving is a really effective long feel, in a film. And then he just casually gets up, makes himself a drink. Like there's just so many elements to the behavior or that the characters have been directed to sort of portray that just adds up to so much like eeriness. It's so hyper effective to make us go, oh my God.
Yeah. And then just put it in really broad or universal terms, like a way you can describe a movie doing something well, or like a moment working, is when it is doing the thing that makes perfect sense for the context. It seems like the natural answer to whatever should happen, yet is one we didn't necessarily see coming or came as a surprise, right? So the another moment that just really got me to sit up, it was subtle, but just could describe it exactly how I just did, was when we have the friend Molly going to investigate Steve's actual alter ego, and she meets his wife, and she has the brilliant idea, which is, the thing that I didn't have the idea, but I should have had if I was with her in that moment, is to call her phone. Yep. And just that moment when it rings in his pocket is so delicious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the other thing, is that maybe what we're dancing around a lot here is how masterful the actual writing is. The directing is incredible too. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not taking away from any of that. But like, so much of what we're talking about comes from the fact that it's so incredibly well written. And like, I always knew I was watching a movie, but like, this is one of those movies where I'm like, this is so real. Like, it feels like I'm in it. Yeah. And I think that part of the reason for that, obviously, is the writing. But what about the writing makes us feel that way? And it's that every single aspect of this is somehow relatable through the eyes of the people who are being victimized. Even the wife, we get it, you know. And I just felt, I mean, even him, like we even get him. As much as he's horrible and we're like, oh, this guy's the worst.
Right, he's addicted to heroin. We get it.
Right. And so there's a logic that exists in the movie that I think is so precise. At no point did I think to myself, no, come on. At no point.
Right.
Right. And that's like not that common.
Which is so key just for being in it in those moments when it's like that's key to get visceral reactions out of us. You know, we need to be under those hands in order to then have the sort of horror moments we want to have a sort of gut reaction to, an emotional reaction to work, whether it's how the imagery of the meat makes us feel, or like Tim, I felt like having a very Tim reaction in this movie where, you know, it's not too often I like get like really caught up in a movie and I'm saying something to it. Or like when we were talking about our last episode, I Saw the Devil, how it's rare for me to get on board to a point where like I'm empathizing so hard with the victim that I'm actually like cheering for that violence and revenge catharsis form. But it was all just, I was just on board so well that like right before it happened, I said to myself, just bite his dick off.
I did too. I literally did the same thing out loud. I was like, oh man, she better just chomp down on his dick right now. And she did, like a fraction of a second later.
Yeah.
And Britt and I were like, yeah.
Well, I was right there with you too.
It's just amazing, right? But like maybe part of this is a hard thing to do. And I really am excited when writers and directors are able to do this, but to write in such a way, I mean, it is the directing too, but to create the story in such a way that we're right there. We're like fractions of a second ahead with a lot of these moments. But to play that game in the filmmaking of like, there are times when we shift to fractions of a second behind, and we have to we're like, oh, they get us, where they something happens where we go, oh damn, yep, of course. And it's just fractions after it's happened. And like the reverse is true, right? Like when Molly gets actually kidnapped by him, we all kind of we're going, oh, get out of there. But you know, she's probably not going to get out of there. And then like when he's operating on her, we almost know immediately because they've teased these just little moments, this like shot of, I think it's of Steve just glancing at her breasts. Or maybe it was the dude that the bartender did it earlier in the movie. Like they give us these little morsels beforehand to set things up that are just so brilliant to get us, our brains are working in real time just to catch up with the moment.
They give us little what beforehand?
Little tiny morsels. Nom, 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 nom. You know, so it just, to me, that's the brilliance of good writing. Like that type of stuff is so exciting because, I mean, I felt this way about Jordan Peele's stuff. Everything has purpose and meaning. Everything. There's no throwaway. Everything is so, what's the word? Like diligently, like focused on. And I think that's what's so cool about good filmmaking. The scope of that to me is like, oh my God, like nothing was overlooked. Everything was precise. And I guess there are examples of that when it doesn't work, but like in my mind, the majority of the films that I like absolutely love are by filmmakers who are known to be that kind of level of meticulous.
Well, that brings up, I guess, just an interesting point on, there's the term in filmmaking mise en scene, which is any element that appears not just in screen, but can be any element used, music, sound, whatever. So I don't, just to clarify how just all the ways that can look, because what comes to mind when you say that is, it's all the pictures that are hanging in the wall and how they're lit, yada, yada, yada. Everything's meticulous in that sense. But then, the contrarian in me, or maybe the always hungry film student in me, needs to look at things in nuanced ways. Like, but what about like Trouble Every Day that we watched, let's say, or some film that's, reliant on a sort of uber realism in order to get something across, where maybe if we're just talking about objects in the frame of the shot, it's not like, oh, that means something necessarily, that in itself is actually getting across a sense of realism, so is doing something. Right. So just saying, just to clarify what you're talking about, what can feel like an exception to the rule is just also an execution of the rule, actually. Anyway, side note.
Yeah, no, it's true though. But I think I just appreciate when you are inside of a movie that you just feel like they're cradling me so gently and well, and I'm like, yeah, man, I can just like experience this.
Yeah, which is always fun to say for something so horrific, a story so horrific.
Oh man, but it's so cathartic too. I mean, the ending feels so good. The fact that Noah is able to get, what was her name, Penny, one of the other victims, out, as well as Molly, and like the second we like see Penny and we go, oh no, like this is going to be problematic. She doesn't have a leg. It just adds to the excitement and the challenge and the like, the escape itself becomes more of a like wild ride.
Absolutely.
Because they have all these new obstacles, and you're rooting for them. You want to see them get out, and even the nature of the fight is super exciting. Right? Like using the meat tenderizer as a weapon, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, hell yes.
Obviously.
Penny, like, crawling on the floor and stabbing him in his leg, probably to just get you back for cutting her leg off. Stuff like that. Just everything feels so good and right, and like, I love every aspect of it. There
was no other place that ending should have been taken place other than a kitchen, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, all of that is just so exciting to me. So, and even the suspense and the no, don't do that, like, moments are great, because that's what we want in this movie.
Right.
Like the dude showing up and hearing a gunshot and being like, oh, hell no, I'm out of here.
It's because there was plenty at stake.
Oh, how dare you.
Do you have anything else for what worked?
No. So all of that is to say, like, I could pick apart moment to moment, like, this whole movie. So just go see it,
It's a funny way to put it. Go see it. You can go stream it on your Hulu.
That's right.
All right. Then I think with that, we can move on to our next section here. What did not work?
It's not ready yet.
Seems to work okay.
No, something important's missing.
What did not work?
Why don't you go ahead? I need to collect my thoughts, because I got so hyped about what worked that now I don't remember what didn't work.
All right. Well, I can throw us to the other side of the spectrum. Again, totally subjective point of view, and we're looking at this from an educational standpoint. And really, what is this but just kind of a way to say, well, if I had done it.
Yeah.
But also, actually, that can look like sometimes, well, I don't know what I wanted, but not that. But in this case, I do have like a clear, if I was carving this to my ideal version of this film.
Come on.
Sorry. Yeah, actually transitions from what we were just saying about the ending. I agree. I loved it set up with the three women who are physically now disabled fighting back against the dude, our bad guy here. In the kitchen with kitchen knives, meat cleavers, yada yada. It lost me when it turned into sort of like a more, I don't know, just kind of like whatever, just seems like a kind of plain Jane, just kind of like back and forth chase where they're out there hiding by the tree. They're out in the forest for some reason. They're out hiding around the house. I thought that was such a good end set piece. That was, the beginning of the fight. We even had a little bit of that, like, oh, they just knocked him out but didn't finish him off. That did take me out of it in that horror movie sense a little bit. I thought they should have just milked that for all it. That one's a bit of stretch. For all that was worth. Where I wanted that to straight up be the end set piece. Imagine, if you will, where that scene had continued, which is just one of those things that's like it's just so hard to shoot, but when you are able to do it, it just works so well of keeping track of the continuity of having this orgy. Actually would be a great word for it, and sort of a play on even more themes of this now reversal orgy happening in a way of these women on this dude. And it's sort of also playing off of the idea of, he, no matter what, let's say, imagine if he just couldn't help, but he keeps fighting back. Like they keep knocking him out, slicing him up, and he keeps fighting it back. I just imagined this like beautiful, grotesque, extended, reverse bloody orgy where they end up basically dismembering him to death and beating him to death, letting us see a physical transformation of him being turned into meat before our eyes because he just keeps getting up and trying to fight back or whatever. He just doesn't die in a certain sense. So yeah, it would have been like a big, I don't know, a stylistic departure, but it's definitely would have been. It's not as far as experimental, but I feel like you need that sort of that little risk factor of trying to do something more than whatever was happening here. That just kind of felt like it ending to me.
I get what you're saying. I think that I would argue without knowing the intention of the filmmakers, but my gut reaction to that is that ending is more of a masculine viewpoint, retribution, revenge, sort of like comeuppance ending. And what we got, and that's not a value judgment on that. I'm just that's my take. What we got felt more feminine centric in that we are experiencing these three women at this moment of, it's desperation in a way, and they are the three of them coming together in a non-negative way, in a non-retribution way. They're surviving, and they're surviving together.
But that's literally what I was just pitching, where I wanted to all be in a not revenge, retribution-based way, even where it is because he just keeps coming at them and doesn't die.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think that these filmmakers could have done that.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a part of me that feels like I like the trope of where we went with it and getting to leave the house and be in nature. It just I felt cool with all of that. It felt good to me. So Yeah, I get where you're coming from. And I think that could be a cool alternate version. But I was very cool with the way it went.
This was something I actually had for things of note I thought was interesting, but screenwriter Lauryn Kahn, a fan of the horror genre growing up, said she wanted to write a film that would appeal to people who were horror fans and people who were not. So I think in my subjective taste here, like I wanted more of the horror, pushing that hard, which I could see like that kind of ending I pitched like almost would cross a line for people, in a sort of...
I think it would not. I think it would be prohibitive.
Which...
I think that like the studio may not have been willing to make that.
But for me, it's like, it's a horror movie and we have all these themes and ideas built in. So it felt more like you aren't pushing it where it wants to be. Like I loved the first 2/3, like the majority of the movie. It was just the ending that just didn't give me that final punch. But then also where I can see that maybe, was coming up against my ideal version. And I'm not saying this is where it came from, it's just a theory that it was, just a sort of intentional balancing act between trying to appeal to horror and non-horror fans alike. But like when you said earlier in the summary, what's sort of the last stage of how these people would be in before finally being, their life being ended, it would be, a blind, tongueless, buttless torso. And I think I wanted to see that, or at least acknowledge that is the horror of where this is being taken to. And kind of like what I said in I Saw the Devil, it almost feels like sure, you don't need it to tell this story, and that can just be like, oh, I get it just fine. Don't show it to me. I don't need that. But for me, it does just feel more like that acknowledgement just feels more like emotionally honest to like the weight of the situation in a way. Like things are this horrible, actually. We are acknowledging that.
I think it'd be a really hard thing to pull off because specifically it would belie the nature of the three women's character. Even if he's sort of the person, like forcing it in some way or another, like his actions are kind of like forcing their hand, I still think it would feel it would feel false to who they are.
Yeah, I get what you're saying as far as just like it's just not the vibe you want to put out to like have the women take something that far.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's a fine line. I would be curious to see these filmmakers do that.
Because I get,
and see how they handle it.
To argue also, just to also argue against what I was just saying, to just not put a woman, who's just in that torso form I described. Just don't put that out there, Don't need it. So I do get that too, but whatever. I'm a dude horror fan.
On the flip
what
side,
do I say?
We live in a society that has, unfortunately, on many occasions, had to grapple with the fact that men have dismembered women's bodies a lot, and torsos are a thing that get found. Women's torsos get found. So maybe you could make an argument that that's how it should go, how this movie should end, is to flip that and be like, here's the one time where that person gets that, the bad guy gets those just desserts.
He did it too. Great. So this kind of, I don't know, it was really all these just sort of pauses or quibbles were just in this last third for me. The last one and this one is maybe more on the level of like, I would just need to see it again to let it settle in my stomach a little longer. But it would be the ending, the her getting that, the message where I guess it was the guy, I think I read, from the
Chad.
way beginning. Yeah, it was Chad. Where he says, you up or can we get together, whatever he says. But at that point, it just felt like so foreign and disconnected for me. Like, that's why I was kind of asking in the first chunk, like, how are these threads of cannibalism and modern dating sort of tied together for you. Because something about that ending, and maybe again, just like first time viewing, my own, naivete or whatever, but it just didn't have that sort of like, catharsis impact where it like all clicked for me. It just felt like, oh yeah, this was a movie that started with a blind date versus, I don't know, just, that's all the themes didn't sort of come together for me with that final tag in a way that I would have hoped. And so it just lost me those sort of two themes being intertwined by the end.
Well, I would say that for me and for Britt sitting next to me, and maybe me responding to her and other women, that it felt correct because of the things I've absorbed from them of their experience with men, that it actually felt right on. Like it worked exactly the way it works, is that this is such a universal experience of of these things that like the Chads of the world will always text you at that exact like most absurd moment.
Yeah, that's great. No, I can tell.
So it's I think it's a woman experience kind of note,
right? That
you and I, we can try to relate to, but we can't actually ever really inherently know.
Yeah, and thanks for talking through it with me here, because I feel like, now I totally get where it's an observed thing for me to relate to or to not relate to. Like what sort of the premise of the whole premise of this movie is like, what if this dude I'm, agreeing to go out with is actually what's the worst what if I can imagine. That's literally like, that was the inspiration for this film. So,
and it's never ending.
Yeah. So, but that is what the last sort of moment is doing. It's like, these were her concerns from the get-go, and this is where it all started, maybe, and she turned out not being crazy after all. So I get how that works, and why I may have not gotten it on that first viewing.
Yeah, and I think a big why you do that in this movie is to remind us all that, after you kill the killer and you get away, the rest of the world doesn't care. They keep doing what they're doing. Misogyny keeps just trucking along, right? Like douchebag guys just keep doing what they do.
Well, how many,
right?
How many, great endings are there that's horror, or just sort of these good versus evil stories where they always end on the battle may have been won, but the war is long from over.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just, I don't really have anything to say of what didn't work. I hate to just make something up. So whatever.
Then we could move on to our next section, things of note.
Things of note!
This should be interesting.
I have a correction. I said Fox Searchlight. It's no longer that. It's Searchlight Pictures.
Got it. Well, I can't speak from the perspective of a woman in today's dating age, but I can, as I already set up, speak to the perspective of someone who's chosen not to eat meat. And so I thought it was super interesting reading about, on the Wikipedia here, this the premiere of this film, which was done in Hollywood. They said that it was at the Inside Hollywood Legion Post 43 on Highland Avenue.
Huh.
This is from Hollywood Reporter, but just on Wikipedia, it said, it had the little fun tidbit that was, but the reception was specifically held before because they thought people, wouldn't have the appetite after this movie. Rightly so, right? So
sure.
I immediately thought, it did not say it in the Wikipedia article. I'm like, well, was it a vegan-friendly meal or not? What were they serving? Because that's all that would really, that's the That's the important detail here, guys. So luckily there's this whole Hollywood Reporter article on it that breaks down the premiere I was able to find. They played up, the meat side of things. They had like a full on, you can see a picture of here. They had like a charcuterie board with meat and cheese and a bunch of cleavers hanging behind it. And it said it's like fresh up in the middle. It's kind of this like, this pink meat colored wall. And it's got, we didn't even talk about how the Satanism references.
Oh, that was the thing that didn't work for me. I forgot about it.
Oh, okay.
That was it. Well, I was like, why you got to bring Satan into this?
it's. I think it works under the context of like something about we get in almost just iconographic or just sort of baseline what it represents may not actually be as it's just all about personal pleasure, and I think that's just like all works with it. But they have that logo from the film of like the Satan cow's head in the middle behind the charcuterie table. But I just can't help but think, well, I'm like, well, guys, like you could have had it have been a vegan friendly meal after the words, and it would have actually kind of like, I don't know. It was just really fascinating to me that you kind of doubled down on where people are at almost, but at the same time, yet you're acknowledging not the hypocrisy, but just kind of that, whatever, that disconnect by having it be a full meat spread, allowing people to be tongue in cheek, about it versus actually confronting it as deeply as this film does. It's like they have faith in their movie to do the job, but well that they, I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
It's interesting. I think it's a, that's a tough one from a, how much do you want to alienate people, or like cause like, oh man, how do I put this? I'm of two minds. I think I get why it's pretty punk rock to put a big meat spread out before a cannibal movie. Right. And so I dig that. Like I dig that concept. But on the flip side, well, it's not even the flip side. Another argument against going full vegan, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I think is probable, is that there are voices in the powers that be that would say, don't politicize this in your premiere. Don't tempt losing the momentum of what the film is bringing by making it about veganism. And you hear that kind of argument a lot. I'm not a big fan of that way of looking at things, because if you want to say something, say it. But so often you have voices saying, "Don't do that." Like it'll be too much for people to handle.
Right. Well, it's interesting.
That's conjecture, by the way. I have no idea if that conversation existed.
Well, we can kind of get clues from. It's nice. This article didn't say anything about the director. I didn't see, but the writer, Kahn, did not have any of the spread because she gave up red meat specifically years ago. So, not full vegetarian, it sounds like. Sure. But she said it was because of her husband's pet pig. She doesn't eat, I guess, beef and pork. But it feels like, it's on that level of maybe it's if where the filmmakers are at is that, I don't want to say in between, because I look at it as pretty, one or the other, but at least transitional, I don't know, whatever you call it. She's someone who at least has taken that leap with, not wanting to eat pigs.
Sure.
So
yeah,
we're
all in the various stages of this process.
Right. But it's so funny. And to say that too, like you described it as punk to have a meat spread up there, when for me, it's like, that's the opposite of punk. What would have been punk is to like have the full non-meat spread there and be that confrontational about it,
Sure.
Or like you have in both options, this or that, at the reception after it. You give people the choice right then and there. Like that's,
you've got one table that's just like gluttonous red meat, everywhere and one table that's the vegan table and be like, you choose, guys.
Yeah, see,
Go for it.
That's punk to me,
That'd be cool.
And I see, since I'm in the world, I see plenty of like the sort of punk vegan, a crossover, whatever's branding and organizations. Anyway, the only other thing I had for things of note that was just kind of more fun stuff in both tracking like where horror movies are at, or just where movies are at, and from the lens of having more, not just women filmmakers at the helm, but just a world that's making attempts to be more aware at long-running tropes and stereotypes of, how women and men are both portrayed in films, of like, the idea of the male hero coming up to, save the day at the end. There was an interesting play on that in the movie where we did have who could have been that character, but as soon as he hears screams from coming, from outside the house, he books it, says, I know how this ends. I know how this movie ends. I'm not getting into it. So just fun, to sort of see that handled in a way where, no, he didn't come save the day, but it was still realistic and didn't feel mired or trapped by any sort of what I'd hope are now long outdated tropes or ideas. But then also just how it sort of plays out these ideas of dating too, where I just like these little touches that were, if you remember, Sebastian Stan, he's doing all the things, asking for a number, whatever, but it's really Noah who initiates, I think, their first makeout sesh, right? And then we also, I liked, we have Molly being the one, the bartender, the friend who it's set up like he's her ex. She gives some kind of suggestion about like, oh, help me with this, and maybe then after that you could come over or something like that. So just, I don't know, I like that just we're continuing to mix things up from these long outstanding tropes that just feel like they hit a pinnacle in the 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Yeah. Definitely. I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else?
That's it.
I mean, I have more things that I could say that worked, but whatever.
All right. Well, then I think that's it for Fresh. We can wind down with some recommendations here. What do you have?
Yeah, maybe I've done this before. I can't find it, though, on our list. So I'm going to recommend Dead Bad Batch. No, there it is. I found it. Damn it. I have recommended it. Why don't you go and I'll think of something?
All right. It's been on my mind to revisit it for a while, both in just wanting to revisit Oliver Stone's movies, and I'd like sort of actually become more of a fan of The Doors in recent years, where I'd always liked them, but didn't think I had like fully got them, let's say. So yeah, revisited from 1991, the Doors movie, and just had a new appreciation for it that I certainly didn't when watching it, the only other time in high school or whatever. Where I really, I'm always complaining about biopics that sort of seem to force this formula really hard. And this was just a really cool example, and just is just on very much the like psychedelic wavelength of it, just kind of like dream grooves along, and like there is conflict between the characters, but it's not punched up in that kind of, plot point-y way at all. And just plus, of course, Val Kilmer's performance, it is perfect, and it's got just that fun, LA of that era setting that I just love so much. Yeah, it was cool. I was really, really into it this time around. It felt like a movie that felt like their music to me. So, and that's, I think, when you're making a biopic, is exactly what you want to do. You want to have it be an extension of the music itself, a filmic extension. So I think it did that through and through. I was really impressed, with The Doors.
So I recently watched Starfish. Do you know about this movie?
Never heard of it.
Oh. It kept popping up. So I watched it, and it's pretty cool. I would check it out. It's fun. It's got kind of this monstery apocalypse, sort of like what's happened to the world thing going on. It also has like, it's got like a problem to solve. Like, it's not a mystery, but it's almost like a puzzle to solve kind of component that I really like. And it's, it's again one of these like indie horror kind of like, seems like it was probably shot on a very low budget and they just made it work, which I love. Like, the go get 'em attitude of filmmaking. So it's worth it. It's a cool one.
Is it
Check
horror?
It's horror. It's definitely horror.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds good. Cool. For next week, we're going to find out how horror this selection is when that's right, go to see it. But one of us among us, if you don't know who, I won't tell you who, is a really big Marvel movies and TV show and comic books fan. So we are going to, in honor of that, and the director of this film, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, we're going to go see that. The sequel to the original Doctor Strange. Now, Sam Raimi, of you know who he is, fame, he said that this film, Evil Dead 2 fans will be happy. There's maybe a little, some kind of rumblings that it's a little more in the horror direction, I guess, which I thought that's what Morbius was supposed to be, their take on. But anyway,
different studios for Morbius, so we can have that conversation.
We may be stretching how we define horror for this next one, but we'll find out, and we won't know until we do. But either way, I'm really happy for Tim. I just outed who it was among us, but for Tim to be able to share his love and knowledge, this is his podcast. Why not take advantage of that and have fun with that? And we may not get a chance to do that closer. So
yeah, I think of all this seems like the one opportunity that we can get away with calling a Marvel movie a horror movie. So
so we're doing it. Great. All right. Well, hey, if you're still here, thanks so much for being here. So in closing, stay fresh, everyone. Thanks for listening.
And we'll sear you next time.
Goodbye.